It's Monday, November 18th, 2024. And I really don't have a fancy opening tonight, so I'm just going to say it. It's the Knee Jerks podcast with Eno, Nick, and Big Al. I'm the Big Al of the equation, Al Beaton, longtime Detroit-based podcaster and blogger. As always, joining me are my one longtime co-host and one kind of new co-host, even though he's been around for quite a while at this point. First off, let's introduce our West Coast correspondent out in the Pacific Northwest, Nick Milanovich. Nick, how are things?
Things are going okay out here. Spent my whole day in my place working from home and missing out on a nice sunny Seattle weather today. So
you had
but glad to be here with you guys.
Shocked. You actually had sun out there today. I'm shocked.
We actually did.
Yeah.
Like 5 minutes.
Yeah, really. I think here in Michigan, we're almost at a point where we're not going to see the sun again till probably March or April. So, but speaking of Michigan, my Michigan-based co-host, Greg Eno of the Greg Eno Substack, he had a very interesting column about Cade Cunningham today. Greg, how are things?
Doing well. I should rename that the Greg Eno Experience. That sounds cooler, doesn't it? Instead of the Greg Eno Substack, the Greg Eno Experience.
Well, I get enough of the experience every 2 weeks. So I don't know.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
I am Greg Eno from my Greg Eno Substack, gregeno.substack.com. I would appreciate it if you would subscribe, and I will be in your inbox every Monday if you do so. As Al mentioned, I did do a piece on Cade Cunningham, specifically on Cade's turnover problem and how that needs to be cleaned up if the Pistons are going to be advancing in their progression and during this rebuild. You can also follow me on X at Greg Eno and follow the Knee Jerks there as well at the Knee Jerks. We are very pleased to be joined once again for the third time in about a year by quickly has become one of our favorite guests, Keith Gave, a long time beat guy for the Red Wings for the Free Press and an author and all sorts of things, and just an overall great guy. We always have so much fun with Keith, and this promises to be no different. As we're going to be talking, obviously, Red Wings. We'll also have Keith let us know. He made a cryptic remark to me, Al, about when I asked him about doing this program. And he said, I might have a book to talk about, so we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about the Yzerplan. We'll talk about life and retirement. We'll talk all sorts of things with Mr. Keith Gave, who's here with us this evening. Keith, thank you for being here, my friend.
My pleasure, guys. And actually, I might have a couple of books to talk about. How's that?
Oh, great.
How's that for a teaser?
That's great. They're
Where
both yours, right?
No, they're not, actually. They're
okay.
But I'll start with this, okay? Because it's pretty exciting. Well, the best sports story we have in Detroit right now is what? The Detroit Lions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pretty fun season we're having with these guys.
Yep.
I've just completed a book. It just came out. It's called The Lions Finally Roar. Here's
nice.
the book right there. I don't know if you guys have seen it yet.
No.
It's written by Bill Mitchell, whose father, it turns out, was a PR guy at Ford Motor Company, and actually the bag man, the personal assistant to William Clay Ford Sr. Bill's father, the author's father, was with William Clay Ford on the day that he closed the deal to buy the Detroit Lions on November 22nd, 1963.
Yep.
You know what that day was, obviously.
Yep.
The day Kennedy was shot.
Mm-hmm.
This book really kind of chronicles the Detroit Lions since then. It's as much about how the Lions got to same old Lions for all those years to where they are now. It's kind of a biography of William Clay Ford and the Ford family. It talks. What I found most interesting about this book is it talks about the sibling rivalry in the William Clay Ford household and why it's Sheila Ford Hamp running this team now instead of Billy Jr. Right. Lots of really, really good stuff. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is because Bill has been invited. Bill Morris, the author, has been invited to the National Writers Series in Traverse City at the Traverse City Opera House on December 18th. And I have been asked to be his host, to be on stage with him and talk about this book, which I'm really, really, really excited about.
That's great. When did that book come out, Keith?
in the last couple of months.
Okay.
It's very, very new. What
That's
it's
great.
called The Lions Finally Roar.
Yeah.
Bill Morris is the author, and it's a terrific read.
Yeah, I think you'll probably see a lot more books about the Lions that come out in the next, X amount of months or years. Good stuff. Thanks for letting us know. Well, that's interesting to know. And the last couple of times you were here, we talked about a lot of things, of course. But one thing I really didn't get a chance to ask you, and I wanted to ask you right now before I forget, and we were talking about just before it came on the air, was obviously you're retired now. We understand that, but I didn't ask you if when you do a job like you did, and I don't care if you're a play-by-play guy or a media or a reporter, whenever you're part of the day-to-day, you're on the planes, you're on the road trips, you're following the team, you're in the thick of it every single day. You live and you breathe it. Mm-hmm. I know there's a certain adrenaline high you get from that. I understand that. And maybe sometimes when the summertime comes, when all's said and done, whether they win the cup or they don't win the cup, there may be a certain letdown because it's over with. So you can recharge for the next year. And we've had Kenny Cal on here a few times. And I haven't really talked to Kenny about this really. Well, first of all, he's not retired, but still. And that is, do you miss that? Do you miss that grind? I know some players, for example, will say, one of the things I miss about being a player is I miss the camaraderie in the locker room. I miss the brotherhood. Do you miss the jumping on and off the planes and running down stories and chasing people down and getting to the rink, 2:00 in the afternoon or watching a morning skate? Do you miss that stuff?
Yeah, I do. Especially at playoff time, guys. When everybody, all your readers were kind of hanging on every word you wrote. You had the best story in town, especially when they were, in the mid '90s, playing New Jersey in the Stanley Cup Finals, and then finally winning it a few years later, and so on. Absolutely, I miss that like crazy. But I will tell you this too, that I wouldn't want my old job back at the Free Press for $1 million. I would hate that job now because it's changed so much with the advent of the internet. Sports talk radio was kind of ruining sports. In my latter years, it got to be less fun because the idiots on the air were reading half of what you wrote and taking some strong opinions, being very critical, and so on. A lot of silly stuff on sports talk radio, guy talk radio, whatever you want to talk it, however you want to describe it.
Right.
But the internet has really ruined it. It used to be you could, it was really competitive between us at the Free Press and the news, trying to, get the news first. And, you had that, those crazy deadlines from about 7:00 in the evening till 1:00 in the morning, 4 different editions that we're writing for. And, and you're right, Greg, when you talk about working a long day, getting into Edmonton for a playoff game like we were in '87 and '88 when they were in the Stanley Cup Finals. Remember that when after they were the worst team in the league by a mile in '85, '86. Then Jacques Demers came to town and they were they went to the Stanley Cup semifinals against Wayne Gretzky's Oilers in '87 and '88. But to get in that town and go to the morning skate, come back and write your early stuff for the early editions, go to the rink, have dinner, cover the game. Now it's about 11:30 Edmonton time, which is about 1:30 in Detroit. You just made the last edition deadline with a game story, and they were holding the press to get it in. The knife is in your gut, turning like crazy. And talk about adrenaline rushes. Yeah, it's an adrenaline rush. And then the game is over, and we're leaving the rink. We're calling one last call to the sports editor who's still there, getting the paper out. And the first thing he says after he quickly says, "Hey, good job today. Good job. What are we doing for tomorrow? What's going in? What are you doing for the next day?" Right. Before you even have a chance to take a breath.
Right.
You're already thinking about the next day in the next day's newspaper.
Right.
It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. And when it ended, I had a difficult time in the summer times. The first couple of weeks afterwards, you have that. I understand what a little bit what postpartum depression is all about.
Mm-hmm.
When you're working your ass off for 6 or 8 weeks straight.
Yeah.
Covering the Stanley Cup playoffs, and then it ends and it's over.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah. You started, when you were in your prime there, the NHL did this crazy thing where they play in the first round. They play 4 games in 5 nights. They play the first 2 games in City A, 1 travel day, then 3 and 4 on back-to-back nights in City B.
It was criminal.
Right.
Criminal.
And I remember one of the players, I don't know who it was, said, why is the league doing this to us? Why is the league making us play 4 games in 5 nights when we would never play 4 games in 5 nights in the regular season? Now, the most important time of the year, they make us play 4 games in 5 nights. It didn't matter where the teams were. It didn't matter if you were in Edmonton and New York. It didn't matter the travel. You played 4 games in 5 nights. And now what you're describing, you say, what are we doing for tomorrow? There's just no time to kind of just take a breath and just kind of go, whew.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. I never understood that. I mean, you finally get to the part of the season that everybody is into, excited about. You want the best teams, the best players to be at their best, and you put them through the first round of the playoffs like that. It made 0 sense. Injuries piled up so quickly because of that. The players were exhausted at the end of those 5 days, and then they had to play. They keep going. Yeah, like a forced march in the military.
Yeah, right. I want the other thing too, Keith, is what was the year that you actually did retire? What was your final year?
Well, I left the Free Press in the middle of 97, 98, and I went to the Dallas Morning News, and I worked down there 4 years. I obviously covered the Stanley Cup Finals when Detroit won it in Washington in 1998, and then Yzerplan put the cup on lap like he did, and then the next year, 99, the Dallas Stars won it. So I covered the Stanley Cup down there. 2000, they were in it again. They lost in 6 games, I think, to 6 games it was to New Jersey, and then in 2001, I left the newspaper business, came back to Michigan, and got into academia and started teaching journalism and English, and started working with students, putting out the campus newspaper.
One of the things I've always said about hockey players is, comparing them to other professional athletes in the other 3 major team sports, was that to me, hockey players, and this is kind of more anecdotal. This isn't really any sort of scientific data I'm basing this on, but just my experiences is that a lot of them came from small towns in Canada, or even small towns in Europe, if you will. Right. And to me, I always thought that gave them a sort of grounded, salt of the earth type feel, as opposed to some of the other athletes who were big time baseball players or football players or basketball players who didn't come from that kind of a background. There are a lot of basketball players, as you know, who played in the NBA, came from New York, Chicago, LA. They came from big cities. They came from playgrounds on those cities. Sure. You didn't really have a lot of big time basketball players that came from little podunk towns in North Carolina or something. They were, all went to big schools and so forth. Very rarely did you find a Dennis Rodman type who kind of came out of nowhere. So these players that you covered, was that your observation as well? Because this was just my anecdotal observation. I don't know if somebody like you who was in the thick of it, did you think of these guys as that way because of where they came from?
Well, I did always think about where these players were when I was talking to them, where they came from. I did think about that, and I made some judgments along the way based on where they were from. A Russian player from Moscow is a whole lot different than a Russian player from Irkutsk, or someplace, in Siberia. Much like Canada. The 3 of the 4 players who played in the grind line were from really the Toronto area or nearby Toronto. They were Ontario. And the 4th guy was Joey Kocur from out west. Very different from a tiny, tiny town in Kelvington, Saskatchewan to Toronto. And, the players recognize those differences. I recognize it. You can tell. But for the most part, the Canadians were just, good, kind, well-raised, well-mannered, Canadian boys. And and the Europeans were, for the most part, kind of the same way. Grateful to be in the NHL, playing in the best league in the world, and so on. I thought, for the most part, the biggest jerks in the game were Americans.
Yeah, that's a surprise.
They were the American players. They had this, they were brought up with this star syndrome. You know, whether they played in the whether they played junior hockey in the Ontario Hockey League or the Western Hockey League, like Mike Modano did, who was not a jerk, by the way. I have to mention him because he played junior hockey. But you know, those who played college hockey and so on. I don't know what it was, but it's that American star syndrome thing that we have. You know, we put our athletes on pedestals. Yeah. They just kind of expected to be there. They're there, and they want to be treated like stars, and they could big time you a lot faster and easier than the Canadians or the Europeans.
You mentioned Modano. You got me thinking about American players. How was Joey Mullen to deal with?
Oh, he's Hell's Kitchen, New York, right? Uh-huh. He was a delight. He was a delight. He was one of the good guys. Came from a hard scrabble streets of New York and wound up in the NHL and a star in the NHL, and always seemed to be beyond grateful for his station in the NHL. I thought he was one of the good guys.
Give us a couple of jerks. Give us a couple of. Yeah, the show is called The Knee Jerks.
I don't want to mention Chris Chelios' name, but
okay. I didn't hear it.
We didn't hear anything. No,
I didn't hear it.
And I'm not going to say anything good about Jeremy Roenick.
Okay, fine.
Well, neither would we.
So. The East Coast elites, Bobby Carpenter. You know, people. I could give you a long list, and I really don't want to do that. But
I get it. I mean, there's because our good friend Bob Page, who makes no bones about the jerks he's dealt with. Reggie Jackson, the primary one. Reggie Jackson he's primary.
Yeah, I've dealt with Reggie Jackson.
Billy Martin was another one that he didn't like. And so there's a few of them there, but no, I don't mean to make you list off, but I just was curious what kind of names came to mind. They always say don't ever meet your heroes, and that kind of thing. But
I got to tell you, the is a lot of times it has to do with where they're from as well. And I can't think of any of the guys who made it to the NHL from the Detroit area. All the years that I covered John Van Beesbrook, the goaltender, Mike Modano, number one draftee overall. I've known Mikey since he was 17 years old, knew his parents, and all the Detroit guys, Doug Waite, Ally Afraidy, name them all. They were all really good to deal with. The boys, the guys in Minnesota nice. We all know that, right? Guys in Minnesota, all pretty nice, reasonable guys. The ones that I always found the toughest to deal with were the East Coast guys, Massachusetts area mostly. Yeah, I don't know why. It's something that I found along the way.
Remember Nicky Fotillo?
Oh God, yeah, yeah. Could fight pretty good, couldn't he?
Oh yeah, he was when he played for the Rangers. He might have scored one goal a year, but he was one of the most popular players for the Rangers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he played. I think he played for Hartford. I think he played for Calgary. He was a delight to watch. I loved Nicky Fotillo. I loved watching him play. I know he couldn't score to save his life, but he knew what he was there for. That wasn't
his job.
Right, that's for sure. And so anyway, okay, I want to talk. Before we bring in Big Al and Nick, because I've been dominating this conversation. I just wanted to kind of reset the thing here. We're going to talk a little bit about the Red Wings, and my fear, Keith, isn't just that they haven't made the playoffs in 9 years and all that other jazz, but I'm stuck. And this is, I think you're a good person to ask this question of, because you were here covering the team when the Winged Wheel was among the most revered sports logos and franchises in all of sports. Forget just hockey. I'm starting to get this icky feeling that a lot of that luster has gone away. And I know that with Stevie Y being the general manager, there's still that link, and I think that still holds some weight. when it comes to maybe bringing in some players from outside the organization. But I'm still concerned, Keith, that the winged wheel has lost a lot of its luster. What say you?
Oh, I think so too. Absolutely, it has. There's no question about that. And I think there was, when you think about it, from the early '90s to the mid 2000s to 2007, 8, 9, right in there, the Detroit Red Wings carried the NHL. All those years of expansion when they grew from 21 to 30, 32 teams, whatever. The Red Wings were the glamour team in the NHL. I mean, they were on national TV every other night, it felt like, right?
Right.
And they got lots of coverage. That rivalry they had with Colorado there in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was greatest rivalry in sports, people said, and I bought into that because it was.
Right.
But they followed on hard times, and they won four of the Stanley Cup, should have won 5 or more.
Yep.
On to the playoffs for 25 years in a row. I think there was some, I don't know if you call it professional jealousy or, whatever around the league, but there are a lot of people who really, even today, kind of, don't mind that Detroit is one of the doormats in the league.
Right.
It has been for 10 years.
Right.
We're taking our lumps here in Detroit now. And,
Mm-hmm.
and not a lot of people around the league care about that, including the commissioner.
Yeah.
It's kind of too bad because not only did the Wings win a lot, but they really did a lot to carry this league for a long time. Yeah. And not a lot of gratitude out there for that.
Yeah, I remember interviewing Brendan Shanahan years after he retired, and he told me that that whole trade that brought him, you probably know this story, the whole trade that brought him to Detroit from Hartford, he said that he wanted out of Hartford. The league didn't want him in Hartford. He told me the league wanted him to go to Washington. And he said, no, I don't want to go to Washington. I want to go to Detroit. They need me. That was after Draper got his clock cleaned by Lemieux, and there was that element of toughness that everybody thought the Red Wings were missing. And he said, no, I don't want to go to Washington. I want to go to Detroit. And so that kind of whole thing came together. Why? Because Detroit had that. It's like everybody wants to be a Lion now. Who would have thought we'd see that? Everybody wants to play for the Lions. Let's bring Nick Milanovich in. Let's talk with Nick about Keith Gate. What you got?
I actually have a couple questions. One was from something you were talking about earlier, and just reporting during the regular season and during playoff time. Like, how do you approach creating stories differently in both of those kind of scenarios?
Well, the writers, I felt like I had a similar experience to the players, really. The 80, 82, 84, I've covered 84 game seasons, is kind of the grind that you just try and get through, right? I never took much time off. I might have taken a couple of days a month off during the season and a week in late February or early December, just a week to kind of recharge the batteries and get ready for the stretch drive into the playoffs. But, the playoffs come along, and I don't know about anybody else, but for me, we talk about the players raising their game for the playoffs. I felt that was especially important for writers, too. For me, I had to raise my game, too, because now everybody was hanging on every word you wrote, right? I remember a lot of years all through those you're talking about 8 weeks of playoff hockey, never taking a day off. I hated taking time off. I kind of got ordered to once or twice to take a day off and not write anything, but I was on the phone. I was still working. I just didn't write anything for the next day paper. You kind of got to raise your name. That's what I miss most about my old job is that time in the playoffs. Like I said, when it ended, it was kind of tough sometimes. I don't think I answered your question very well, and I'm sorry, but there's a big difference between writing through the 6 month, 7 month regular season and then get in the playoffs and go for a couple more months.
How do you find this? What kind of approach do you take for the stories themselves? Like, it seems like it's just I mean, you're always trying to kind of maintain interest in the articles, the team, and
and here's the other thing: when the playoffs start, you usually got 2 or 3 or 4 other people from the sports staff, and sometimes from the city desk, who are there with you, and you kind of got to divide up the story for the next day, you you get creative. You want dibs on certain stories. For me, I wound up talking to a lot more people. And I always talk to a lot of people, but I'm talking to everybody, trying to look for a different shade of the same story that everybody's writing. Or you look harder, you look deeper, and you kind of it's a fun time of year because everybody's in kind of a talkative mood, anyways. But it's just it's challenging. I can remember when I was in Dallas, when Dallas was playing Buffalo in the Stanley Cup Finals in 1999. We were putting out a 12-page special section every day of the week through the Stanley Cup Finals. We traveled from Dallas to Buffalo, Buffalo to Dallas. We traveled 13 people from our sports staff back and forth covering that story. I remember Gary Bettman coming up to me at the end and shaking my hand and said, your newspaper has set a new standard on this continent for Stanley Cup coverage. It made me feel pretty good.
Right on.
So we're talking with Keith Gave here live at the Knee Jerks. I'm Greg Eno from gregeno.substack.com. That was Nick Milanovich. And Big Al Beaton is here as well. Let's bring Big Al in. What you got for Keith Gave?
Well, Keith, I know you've covered some pretty legendary head coaches in your time, here in Detroit and in Dallas. But there's Derek Lalonde, who is the current head coach in Detroit, is reportedly, even though we're not hearing it from the team, the fan base wants him on a hot seat big time. And honestly, I think the fan base wants him replaced. And what's interesting is I believe he's like 6th in tenure and he's in his 3rd year in the NHL. Have you seen how the league has changed from, I think coaches had such a much longer leash to now where if you don't have things turned around in a couple years, you're probably going to you're going to be out the door. And it's starting to look like that's what's going to happen here in Detroit.
Yeah, it's certainly the coaching carousel has sped up for sure in the last 10 years or so anyways. You can sort of understand it. Owners want to see their teams in the playoffs, and these billionaires have short attention, not attention spans, but short fuses when it comes to making decisions like that. You can't fire all the players when they're not getting the job done. There's one guy you can change, or the second guy, the general manager, you can change too if you want. But coaches are getting fired at an alarming rate for sure. And I think in most cases, I can understand why. And if they make a change in Detroit soon, the sooner the better in my view. I think the fan base here is right. Derek Lalonde, what I see from this team, what I've watched the last 2 games out west, the mistakes that they're making, they're scoring a little bit in the power play. They can't score 5-on-5. Their defense is horrible. They're making the same mistakes over and over again. Horrible giveaways leading to goals that you want to lose. They've scored 1 goal in the last 2 games. It's pathetic to me the way this team is playing right now, and I think a change has to be made.
Yeah. Well, and to follow up on that, though, how much blame does Steve Yzerman get for this? Because all of a sudden the Wings are supposedly been rebuilding. Yep, they were up against the cap to the point where they're giving away defensemen to clear cap space.
Right.
Their asset management's been horrible this past year. They're old, and they play a very boring and ugly brand of hockey. Yeah. And yet I still it feels like the fan base, I think maybe the red and white colored glasses are starting to come off a little bit when it comes to Yzerman, but I just get the feeling that I don't think the Ilitches would ever make a change of Yzerman if it came down to it.
Well, I agree with you there, and I think the criticism is valid. God, I wish sometimes like the times like these, I wish I had a platform like I had when I was at the Detroit Free Press, because I got a lot to say, and I would, and I wouldn't be afraid to say it. And I think the writers, the media in Detroit are afraid. They're not very critical of the team, the coach, the management, the ownership, and the ownership's got to take some blame as well. But I think as long as Marion Ilitch is drawing a breath, Steve Yzerman's not going anywhere. And I think Chris Ilitch looks up to Steve Yzerman like a big brother. They're paying him $5 million a year. And he's done some good things, and he's got screwed on the draft over and over and over again. And he's never had a chance at, one or two overall pick to get a bona fide franchise player. And he's still drafted pretty well, but he's made some suspect signings in the last couple of years that and he's let guys get away. He's made some very strange decisions in the last couple of years, and I talked to him in at training camp in September up here in Traverse City, and I essentially said, "How you holding up?" He said, "Well, it's a tough job, but I'm doing okay." I feel bad for him. At the same time, he's getting paid $5 million to turn this franchise around, and it's not going very well, very fast.
This was always, though, Keith, going to be the risk that everybody took when they brought Steve back. I mean, it was a risk that Steve was going to take. It was a risk that the fans were going to take in terms of, their dueling emotions about this guy. It was a risk that the ownership was going to take. It was a risk that everybody was going to take, because while it was really well received, of course, at the time, and there's a lot of excitement when it was announced that he was coming back, he didn't have to come back. This is something he wanted to do, and I understand that. I appreciate that. I mean, it's kind of like the whole welcome back Cotter thing, right? So you want to go back to your old haunts,
right?
And then there's one thing he hasn't done, of course, is lift a cup as an executive. But now we're at a point, and you remember, and you know this. He in Tampa, he hired a nobody knew who he was, Guy Boucher, to be his. I think it might have been his first coach in Tampa, and let Guy go about around this time. And one of the, I can't remember what season that was. And then he brought in a guy nobody ever heard of, who, by the way, is now going to go to the Hall of Fame, mark my words, and that's John Cooper.
Damn right he will.
And nobody knew who John Cooper was.
Right.
And so there's precedent that Stevie could indeed make a change. I'm kind of like, I know, Keith, you and I go back and forth on Twitter, and I know that you have said, there needs to be a change behind the bench. My concern is exactly what Al said. I'm not sure, and I wrote a piece about this about 3 or 4 weeks ago. I'm not sure that the players buy into the Lalonde system. And I don't hear a lot of players being effusive about Lalonde. We got tons of players talking about Dan Campbell. I got tons of, even the Pistons are waxing poetic about JB Bickerstaff. And the Tigers players love AJ Hinch. I don't see that. Now, I know that hockey players are different. They're not, that's not their way. I understand that. But I'm also seeing, Keith, if you read between the lines, and you're smart enough to know this, guys like Pat Kane, the things that he says after the games are, they're not really backhanded slaps at Lalonde, but they're words that indicate to me that he's a little frustrated maybe with the way that they're playing. I don't mean like the way they're playing, but the style that they're playing. They get up 2 goals, and it's dump and chase, and what the fans on Reddit call turtling, turning into a turtle. And it's costing them games. And like Al said, it's an extremely boring. They won a game on the island where they got 10 shots on goal. Right. They are relying too much on their goaltending, which frankly isn't very good to begin with. So
Cam Talbot is playing very well.
Talbot's okay. But you can't play. This isn't Tony Esposito in 1972 where he's going to play 75 games. Okay.
Right.
So what do you do? I mean, is it? I just feel like to me, right now, the referendum on Stevie is what he does with Lalonde. If he lets this thing go on another month and they're still playing uninspired hockey and they're 10-15, and if he doesn't make a move, And it wouldn't even have to be to save this season, because that's probably wouldn't work anyway. But if he doesn't make a move when they're in that kind of dire, to me, that's an indictment of Yzerman, if you ask me.
You're right. It is. It is. I agree. So I would hope that the general manager is listening to guys like Patrick Kane, and guys like Dylan Larkin, who's desperate to be back in the playoffs again, according to an interview that he had with Helene St. James the other day. Yeah. And you can't blame him. Right. You would think that the general manager is listening to this, and I know Yzerman keeps preaching patience, but patience is running very, very thin, and you're starting to see more and more empty seats at Little Caesars Arena, and that is something that ownership will take note of. And I think something's got to give. Something's got to happen.
Yeah, I think so. We're talking with Keith Gave here on the Knee Jerks. I'm Greg Eno from my Greg Eno Substack, and Big Al Beaton is here. We just heard from him, and Nick Milanovich is here as well. Let's talk about the league in general, the game in general. You come from the unfortunately had to cover the left wing lock days, which brings back. I wake up in the middle of the night screaming when I think about that. But what are the changes, Keith, in the game that, as you've noticed now, in your retirement, watching the games on TV or going down to Little Caesars maybe on occasion, and what you saw, particularly in the mid to late 80s, where they were scoring, the goals were flying, 8 or 9 goals a night.
Yeah, it's a different game now for sure, eh? I can't say that I enjoy it much. Today's game. Everything is speed. I was talking to Mike Modano a few months ago. He's he's working with Bill Guerin, the general manager of Minnesota Wild now. But Mike was talking about those series that Detroit and Dallas had. Well, Detroit, Dallas, and Colorado were the 3 best teams in the West. Dallas was every bit as good as those 2 teams. And he said, "Man, I'd love to be playing today." He said, "Guy, you watch the guys with the puck now; they're just flying through the neutral zone, right? Just with the puck, just flying through." He said, "When we played, we'd be carrying 4 guys with us, trying to get through the neutral zone." Right. And what the kids can do with the puck today is spectacular. Yeah. But like Darren McCarty was telling me the other day, he's watching a game. This was last year. He's sitting in the I don't know where, at the Little Caesars Arena with Chris Draper, the assistant general manager, watching their team blow a 4-goal lead, right? And which is not uncommon in the NHL anymore, blowing 4-goal leads. And McCarty says, "Jesus, how do you blow a 4-goal lead in this game?" And Draper looks at him and said, "Dude, you're watching the game. Does anybody hit anybody anymore?" Mm-hmm. There's very little physical contact today. There's very little retribution for cheap hits.
That's true.
Frankly, I'll take the game in the late 80s through 90s when you had Joe Kocur and Bob Probert, kind of patrolling Steve Yzerman's wing and giving players like him enough room to do his thing. And then we come to the mid 90s. We had the left wing lock, while New Jersey had the neutral zone trap, which was pretty boring hockey, but they won a Stanley Cup with it. But then we also saw the Russian 5 in Detroit and what they could do with the puck, and it kind of changed the game for about 10 years. Everybody started to play puck possession hockey, and it was a pretty fun game. And now speed's just taken over, and it's everything is dump the puck around. The whole game is played around the boards now, and you win those puck battles along the boards, you got a chance. If you don't win those puck battles, it's going to be a long night. And Detroit's having a lot of long nights.
Yeah, that's for sure. Let's bring in Nick Milanovich again. What you got for Keith Gave?
Well, since we're talking about the NHL in general, I've been reading where the NHL wants to continue expanding, which seems kind of like any of these sports leagues. I think the upper limit is about 30-ish teams. After that, it kind of gets ridiculous. And in hockey, it seems kind of weirder than other sports because the NHL will put a team somewhere strange, like in Arizona, and then or I've even read where they're thinking again about putting a team in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And I think an Atlanta franchise only benefits another Canadian city eventually. So because they moved the last two up to Canada afterwards. Like, how is like even like throughout the years, like when the Wings were doing very well, you know, they were like a 21 team league, and now they're at like 32 teams. Like
32, yeah.
And add more just seems kind of insane. It's like already there's the old argument of kind of diluting talent, and then I don't see like dynasties forming, or like a Montreal, whatever they were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s are never going to be that again because of expansion, I guess. So,
No, well, we expansion and also the player movement, the salary cap. It's really tough to keep a lot of talented players on the same roster for several years in a row. You just can't do it. The math, the math doesn't work. But I'll tell you about when you talk about NHL expansion. I had dinner in Florida with an NHL governor who goes to the meetings, who's been going to the meetings for decades, the league meetings, and he shared something with me that I thought was fairly stunning when you want to talk about expansion. The NHL's long-term plans. I don't know how long-term we're talking about, but there's already a lot of talk very recently about adding another couple of teams right now or very soon. The NHL eventually wants to get to 40 teams.
Oh
wow!
They want to get to 40 teams. They want to have two 20-team conferences.
Oh my God!
And the conferences will play all their entire schedule amongst themselves, and the winners of the conferences will meet in the Stanley Cup Finals, much like the old American League and National League in baseball, right? Now the baseball, Major League Baseball, has intermingled the two leagues, but this is the long-term. Gary Bettman's long-term plan is that, and I got to tell you, I don't much care for the idea of going back to Atlanta. I don't care if Arizona ever gets another team. That debacle there was disgusting. Houston had a pretty good, has a little hockey history. Gordy and his sons played down there, and they won some Avco Cups in the old World Hockey Association, right? But I want to see if there's true expansion like that, you got to have more teams in Canada. You got to go back. I think you got to go back to Quebec City. Frankly, I think Toronto should have another team. There are two teams in LA. Why shouldn't Toronto?
I think there are a lot of fans in the Maple Leafs that want to have another team as well.
Well, listen, people in Toronto are dying for an NHL team, man.
Yeah.
They're dying for an NHL team.
Do you think they'd go nuts enough to have a team in Europe?
Oh, I think that's coming. I like that. Frankly, if you're gonna, I don't know how they could make this happen, but I'd like to see European division. Like 6 teams over there, and you could do. There's enough talent over there. Of course, the talent is spread out through the league, but I think you have to have a team from Moscow, from Prague, from Moscow, Prague,
Stockholm.
Oh, Helsinki, Stockholm. That's 4. A team in Berlin, or a German team, and would Austria or Denmark, or it gets thin in a hurry. I get it after 4 or 5 teams, but I'd love to see that team. When you make the European trip, you spend 2 weeks over there, you play a bunch of games, come home, and the European teams come over here to play kind of the same way. I'd love to see that.
Do you think Milwaukee could support an NHL? They've got some hockey history in the minor leagues. Do you think Milwaukee could support an NHL team or no?
Yes, I do. It's a Rust Belt city with Wisconsin is a tremendous hockey state, like much like Minnesota and Michigan. Absolutely, I do.
Okay,
absolutely.
Because I find it interesting. There's never been Wisconsin just hasn't been an NHL for whatever reason. It's
Market.
kind of,
No, I remember with the Wings, we played an exhibition game there one time, and they filled the building, and it was a great atmosphere and a lot of fun, and that was that. Sometimes the NHL has these exhibition games around the country, just kind of test markets. I remember when Detroit played Edmonton in an exhibition game in Dallas, one of the first games down there, and Jacques Demers was the coach in Detroit. And, I remember talking to Gretzky after the game, what he thought of the atmosphere, and he said, "Man, let's get a team down here. This is amazing." And it took a few years, but they got a team there, didn't they?
Yeah, and some people forget that Michigan, the state of Michigan, had a bunch of minor league teams: Flint, Saginaw, Port Huron, all played in either the IHL or some other. There are a lot of teams that are funky.
Muskegon,
Muskegon, you had the, I think I can't remember the nicknames of these teams. The Saginaw Gears, maybe the Flint Flags.
Yes,
I can't remember, but
the Port Huron Flags.
Port Huron Flags, and so they've those. It's funny, those cities that you wow, they were supporting IHL. You might say, well, IHL, big deal, but IHL hockey, a lot of that was a feeder system. The NHL,
the IHL played pretty well at the Palace when Davidson had that team out there for several years. Yep.
Yeah. Big Al, what you got for Keith Gave?
Well, maybe I'll rail against the NHL a little bit and how they run the league or how they promote the league. For example, the Winter Classic used to be this wonderful thing they had on New Year's Day. And I don't think they'll ever top when they had it at the Big House, Michigan Stadium, when they're playing in the snow.
Oh yes.
Then they started to let's have 4 or 5 of these around the around the league, because everybody wanted to have one.
Right.
Instead of keeping it special, they essentially diluted it. They've done the same thing with the All-Star Game. I have no idea what the All-Star Game is anymore when it comes to the teams and how it's played and the points are made. Well, you know what I mean. It just feels like at times the NHL is just flailing at times to put themselves front and center of the media, trying to be more than the 4th or 5th most popular sport in the U.S., and it doesn't seem to be working.
No, you're right. You're right. I agree with you completely. And the good news is that there will be no All-Star Game this year, right?
Yeah.
Because you got the what do they call the World Cup of Hockey? The 4 teams that are going to play a short tournament in February, which is good, I guess. It gives the players a little chance to play best on best, but you can't have a best on best world tournament without Russia in it. I'm sorry. I know that politics prevents that right now, but I kind of don't. I don't get it. But at least we don't have to suffer through an All-Star Game.
That's for sure. Keith, before we let you go, tell us what you're doing now. Is there anything are you doing anything we need to know about? This is your chance to plug something.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just finished up another book. It's at it's being printed right now. It'll be out in mid to late January. I'm not sure of the exact date yet. It's called The Grind Line.
Okay.
The Grind Line.
Wonderful.
It's about those 4 guys who helped Detroit win 4 Stanley Cups.
You probably could have written a book about all 4 of them. You probably could have written 4 books on those 4 guys.
Pretty much, yeah. I've got to tell you, I've had so much fun putting this book together. People think they know those guys, and I can promise that you're going to learn a lot more about each of those 4 guys than you ever could have imagined. Let me tell you this. In Detroit, we don't have a whole lot of named lines, right? In our 98-year history, we got the production line,
right?
Mm-hmm. We got the Russian 5, which isn't really a line,
right?
And we got the grind line. Name another one. They're not many.
No,
anyways,
right.
that production line, which was Sid Abel between Lindsay and Howe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then after a few years, Alex Delvecchio slid in and replaced Sid Abel. So there were 4 guys there on the production line over the years, correct? Those guys won a total of 14 Stanley Cup rings. Pretty big deal. They were pretty good, right?
Mm-hmm.
The grind line, Kirk Maltby, Draper, and then you started with Joe Kocur. After a couple of years, Darren McCarty slid in, and also, I mean, Scotty Bowman was not afraid to interchange, swap out McCarty and Kocur, and whoever wasn't playing would play on Steve Yzerman's wing. And by the way, Scotty Bowman wrote the foreword to this new book.
Oh, wonderful.
Which is very kind of him.
That's awesome. Yeah.
But the grind line, you add up their Stanley Cup rings, 14.
Wow.
14 Stanley Cup rings, as much as the production line.
Wow.
Anyways, it's a fun book, fun read. It'll be out in January, and I'm real excited about it.
That's great. Real quick thoughts on Pavel Datsyuk going into the Hall of Fame.
Oh, absolutely deserved. Very, very, very much deserved. I would caution people not to get too excited about seeing his number 13, Race to the Rafters, for much the same reason that Sergei Fedorov's number's up there. He pissed this team off big time when he left with a year left on his contract to go back to Moscow to play, and really put them in a bind big time. It was that whole loyalty factor that that the ownership management didn't much care for. More power to him. He certainly deserves it. He's a fabulous, fantastic player to watch play. The Magic Man, the stuff that he could do. In many ways, he changed the game, because you see a lot of kids now doing this stuff that he was doing routinely during games when he played. I think next up is Henrik Zetterberg. Should be in the Hall of Fame very, very quickly in the next year or two.
That would have been my next question. If you think he
and you'll see number 40 up in the rafters very, in my guess, before you'll see 13 up there.
Yeah, and that's just gonna make it even more stark. that the other ones are. I get it.
Be like not retiring Lou Whitaker when you're
right.
Yes.
That's a tough one.
Well, it's ridiculous that Lou Whitaker's not in the Hall of Fame. I mean, I don't know what the hell the people voting now, the old timers committee. I don't know what they want more than what Lou Whitaker has given them in terms of numbers.
Not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
You don't think so?
No. If it hasn't happened right now, well, we'll see. I almost want it to happen so I don't have to hear people say, "Why isn't he in the Hall of Fame?" I'm so tired of hearing, "Why isn't Lou Whitaker?"
In other words, this argument's all about Greg.
I've been a steadfast Lou should not be in guy, and I get people come at me all the time. I don't care. But now I'm to the point where I want him in just so I don't have to hear it anymore. I don't want to hear it anymore.
Yeah.
Just put him in. Shut everybody up.
I'm a big Chris Osgood belongs in the Hall of Fame guy too, but I think Lou Whitaker deserves to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame way more than even Osgood deserves to be in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Ozzy, that's a tough one.
They're both deserving.
Well, you could argue about a lot of goalies have been kind of shoved to the side when it comes to the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Tough.
Well, it surprised me that they let Mike Vernon in.
Good point.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Yeah, for sure. Keith, thanks for being here. We, as usual, a lot of fun. Could have got another hour. We love it. Come back anytime, please.
My pleasure. Anytime, guys. Thanks for having me. Hey, I appreciate
no problem. Thank you.
Absolutely.
By the way, the book is called The Grind Line. It'll be out in mid-January. Will it be available on Amazon, I presume?
It'll be available everywhere. Yeah, I think it might be available for pre-order right now. I got to announce that on Twitter. I got to just make sure that it's ready, but I think it is.
That's great.
Thank you.
Good luck on that one, my friend. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Take care.
Thanks, Keith.
All right. As usual, a lot of fun.
It is, yes. Always a lot of fun talking to Keith, and he is when he went off a little bit about the beat writers not wanting to shake things up, so to speak, or not really criticize as much as they should. I mean, I'm honestly shocked sometimes, when I see Helene St. James actually criticize the Red Wings just a little bit, like she has been as of late. But yeah, this town really misses some muckraking reporters, beat writers, columnists in this town. We really don't have them anymore.
I wonder if that's because all that muckraking is done on social media by people who aren't even qualified to do the muckraking. You know what I mean? It's like
or aren't worried about the access either.
Aren't worried about the access, or aren't worried about the aren't worried about the repercussions.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a loss. It's lost. You're right. He's right, and that's not the first time that he said that on this program. I think he's mentioned before that he's not all that jazzed about the state of Detroit sports media in general, not just the Red Wings. But good stuff with Keith. Appreciate it.
Indeed. All right, Greg. You know what time it is?
It is time for a game we like to call Whose Birthday Is It, Maestro? Everybody knows how we play this game by now. We give Al and Nick a clue or two or three of an individual whose birthday it is today in the world of sports. And if one of those gentlemen can guess this person within the first two clues, he will receive a case of Big League Chew. Remember Big League Chew?
Yes, and I believe one of the inventors was Jim Boughton.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
The author of one of my all-time favorite books.
Yes. This person made his name in the world of football. He was born on this date in 1948. Sadly passed away kind of young in 2010 at the age of 61. But was he went to the Ohio State University and was generally considered one of the baddest of the bad when it comes to the Oakland Raiders.
Oh, I know this. I should know who you're talking. Is it? I should know this. It's on the tip of my tongue, but it's not coming out. And this might be a little bit before Nick's time. Right?
Might be a little bit. Oh, yeah, could be.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Is it Jack Tatum?
It's Jack Tatum. Very good. The assassin.
I kept because Daryl Stingley kept sticking in my mind.
Yeah, he was the one that hit Stingley. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and paralyzed Stingley. Yeah, Jack Tatum, who also was the one who hit Frenchie Fuqua in the famous Immaculate Reception.
Yeah.
And he was the one that delivered the hit. And to this day, Tatum and Fuqua go back and forth on who touched the ball last. Yep. Harris, of course, Franco Harris caught the ball, winning for the touchdown.
And there's not a clear view of him actually catching the ball before if it hit the turf or not.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yes.
that film has been almost as scrutinized as the Zapruder film. That Immaculate Reception.
Immaculate Conception.
My Catholic background showing up there.
Well, someone was screwed that day, right? And nobody knows where it came from. So.
Oh God!
Oh my goodness!
Sure. Oh, Tatum. Yeah, Tatum. He's not in the Hall of Fame, but he made several Pro Bowls. He won a Super Bowl with the Raiders. He was a fierce hitter. Played for Ohio State for Woody Hayes, and I didn't know he died so young. He died in age 61, heart attack. I didn't know that. 61 years old. So yeah, good stuff. So a case of Big League Chew on its way down to the Michigan-Ohio border.
All right, next time you see me, I'll have a big chaw and a
big
side of my mouth.
Big wad.
Chaw. Yeah.
Chaw.
Yeah. All right. All right. Since we knocked the wings out when we're talking to Keith, and and honestly, right now, I think when it comes to the Red Wings, I think a lot may hang on what happens on their game tonight on the West Coast. Or actually, by the time Thanksgiving rolls. I have a feeling by the time we have our next show, we'll have a better idea if Lalonde is, well, he might even be fired by that point for all we know. So with that, we want to talk a lot about the Lions, obviously, who are, God, it's hard to say how good they're playing right now. And the Detroit Pistons, who are surprisingly competent, I guess, this year. And I think that's a good place to start, since Greg did just write about them in his column this week, his Substack column. So let's start with the Pistons, and we'll close out with the Lions. So It took 50 games, guys, for the Detroit Pistons to win 7 games last year. I believe it was in like early mid-February when they won their 7th game. This season, it took them 15. They won? I believe it was last night, if I believe. So they're now 7-8, and at 7 wins, they have already reached half of last season's victory total, where they only won 14 games all year. 7-8 start is the best start by this team since they were 8-7 in 2018-2019. They're second place in the Central, and they're 5th overall in what looks to be a very down year in the Eastern Conference. The Eastern Conference doesn't look very good right now. So, I guess first off, I'll start with you, Greg. I mean, the Pistons are looking. I hate to use the word impressive, but if we're grading on a curve, I could say impressive because they could easily have 2 or 3 more wins if they made some foul shots. Essentially, I mean, they had Ron Holland, who looked like deer in headlights, missing 2 free throws that cost them a game, and Tobias Harris missing a foul shot that could have sent a game into overtime. But even still, you could also say there's a couple of games that could have went the other direction. But they played their best game of the year. Last night against the Wizards. They beat them by 20. So, Greg, I don't know about you, but they, and we've kind of said this before in the past, but they're actually kind of fun to watch right now. And I will admit this, they are a lot more fun to watch than the Red Wings.
That's for sure. Well, we were texting, the 3 of us were texting last night, and I said, Nick had said, I had said that, the teams they're playing are not very good. Let's face it. And when City Hall was here a couple weeks ago, he said, he looked at the November schedule. And he said, they could come out of November 500, and
yes, he did.
Because he looked ahead and he was right because they play a lot of lousy teams. And I said that in my piece today is they built this 7-8 record largely off the backs of the dregs of the East, and really nobody's good in the East except for Boston and Cleveland, really.
Right.
And but then Nick said, yeah, but in previous years they would have lost to those teams, and he's right. There is improvement in that regard. Okay, they're beating teams that they should beat. If you want to use that term. And who cares how you get the wins? I mean, if they're winning, if they're beating the Wizards, like you said, by 20, okay, the Wizards stink, fine, but they're winning games, and they need to learn how to finish these games off. And they finished the Wizards off. They didn't. They went into the 4th quarter. The 23-point lead or whatever. The Wizards scored like the first 6 of the 4th, and everybody got nervous. But then they settled down, put them away, won by 20. And they're starting to, even though, like you mentioned about the free throws with Holland and so forth, they've had some hiccups late. But for the most part, they're kind of learning a little bit better how to finish these games off. They finished off Toronto, and that kind of got a little dicey toward the end. They finished that one off. They beat the Lakers at home, and that could have gone, sideways in previous years. So I think that's what you're looking for is that kind of incremental progress. Right. They're 2-0 in these cup games, in the NBA Cup, they're 2-0. Who would have thought that? For whatever stock you want to put in the NBA Cup, but they're 2-0 there. They haven't really been blown out per se. I mean, they had that stinker against the Knicks here a few weeks ago, but they've really not been blown out. They've dropped some late ones, maybe some tough ones, some buzzer beater ones, but they've also won a couple buzzer beater type games. So, my piece today, though, was mainly about how Cade Cunningham seems to be having still some difficulty taking care of the basketball. I'm hoping that's just something that he'll work himself out of. The good news is I think that's a correctable thing. I think that's something that's correctable. It's not an intangible, like, is he a good leader or any of that kind of, that kind of stuff. It's tangible. I think you can work on, you can coach somebody out of that. I think he's still driving into trouble sometimes, putting the basketball into harm's way when he doesn't have to. I think a lot of these turnovers he's committing are because he's putting himself in harm's way because other teams are still collapsing on him in the paint, and he's not making that adjustment. And he's got to remember, he's got guys now on the team that can hit some shots. And Tobias has been a little uneven this year, but he's come on since the first few games. He was awful. He's starting to come on. Malik Beasley, I think, has become somebody they can kind of trust out there. So that's my thing. That was my thing about Cunningham. The team itself, though, I think that they're, unlike, like you said, Al, unlike the Red Wings,
Mhm.
unlike Lalonde, I think they're
Mhm.
quickly buying into what JB Bickerstaff is selling.
Yeah. Yeah, and Nick, I think it's safe to say, is it safe to say at this point that Monty Williams is a basketball terrorist? Because specifically with the young players, look, the big question we had for the last couple years: can Jaden Ivey play with Cade Cunningham? And apparently Monty Williams didn't think so because he started Killian Hayes over him. And Killian Hayes isn't even in the league right now. And now you got Ivy playing majority of his minutes with Cade Cunningham. He's averaging almost 20 points a game.
I remember, I think it was Bob Page on one of our Twitter exchanges saying, the coach doesn't matter as much in basketball as they do in other sports like football. But I would tend to disagree with him in this particular case for sure. Like, Monty didn't want to be here, but at the same time, you can't blame him for if some lunatic comes to you and says, "Hey, you want $85 million over the next 5 years?" Who's going to say no? Honestly, it's like it's guaranteed for 5 years. It won't go away. But you could tell he was not interested.
Right.
Just body language, attitude, kind of that casualness. But Bickerstaff wants to coach.
Yeah.
And he wants to improve the team. And it makes a difference. I mean, that's what Dan Campbell did. It's like, okay, we're going to try to be better as a team. And the team is responding. I haven't seen that out of the last two Wings coaches whatsoever either. So it's kind of like, yeah, we're going to do this. We're going to, it's just like game tactics. Like, that's not what a head coach is for. They're for a lot more than that. And good riddance to Monty. I think he's now coaching his son's high school team somewhere. And pretty soon, Killian Hayes will probably be a starting point guard once he's eligible.
Yeah, it's I think I don't think people say, "Oh, Monty was trying to get fired." No, I don't think he wasn't trying to get fired. I think he just didn't want to be here. And he was going through the motions. He was doing head coach things, but he wasn't leading the team, and he wasn't trying to make anybody better. You nailed it right there.
I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's and honestly, I would wonder if a team would ever want to risk giving that guy the helm to another team at this point, seeing how essentially, I don't want to say stole 70-some million bucks, but he sure didn't earn it. I'll put it that way. I don't blame him for taking the job, but I do blame him for taking a job if he really didn't want it. Because he could have sat for a couple years and then did the things he wanted to do and then taken another gig. But it's all under the bridge at this point because, Bickerstaff is a huge upgrade. I know Cleveland fans had some issues with him, but he has Bickerstaff so far anyway is shown to be a very I would say the perfect coach for a young team. I think because we're already seeing improvements with most of these guys. Yeah, and Greg, this to kind of get back to you with on Cade Cunningham. Yeah, the turnover thing. I hope you're right. It's just a blip on the radar, or it's him trying to do too much, because he spent the last 3 years here not having any kind of support on the court. The spacing wasn't there. He didn't have any 3-point shooters on the court with him half the time, so he had to kind of do this all by himself. And I think that might be. I don't know. This might be more of a trust thing. Now that he's got some guys that he can actually say, if I get you the ball, you can put it in the hoop from 3, because that's the league nowadays. I hopefully that would help fix his turnover issues, because you're right. It's extremely frustrating to see him dribble into the paint, see 3 guys collapse on him, and then he makes a bad pass, or for that matter, dribbles himself into trouble. We've seen that numerous times. And I'm getting to the point now. This is your 4th year in the league. You got to correct that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it will get better. I think that it's. I'm banking kind of what you're saying. I'm kind of banking on the more talent they bring in, the more that JB gets his meat hooks into this thing, and the players around Cade. I feel like it's. I know we're about Cade, and maybe it's unfair to just single him out because he's not the only one, of course, that commits turnovers. I get it.
Right.
But my thing is, if he wants to take that next step and truly be, because JB mentioned the word superstar a couple weeks ago after he had one of his triple doubles. If he wants to achieve that level, then he has to take care of the basketball better. I mean, it's like you can't have a superstar quarterback who's going to throw 25 interceptions a year. He can't do that. So I think that it will get better. I don't think he's basketball intellectually challenged. I don't think it's anything like that. I think he's just had maybe some bad habits. He's gone through, this is his third coach now. He had an older Dwayne Casey in his first couple of years. He lost basically the entire second year to the shin injury. Then here comes Monty, which was a nightmare, like you said. Yeah. And you really can't even count that. And now here's JB. So you got to give him some grace in that regard. So it wasn't really a hit piece like this guy stinks. It was just be something like he just needs to get better on that. And I know I'm not saying anything I'm not going out on a ledge by saying that. I understand that, but I just feel like it. With the team now at 7-8, down at halftime tonight to the Bulls, but 7-8, beating some teams that they should beat. I still see Cade I feel like they've still had to kind of overcome Cade in a way. I still feel like he's done more harm than good, despite those triple doubles. I feel like in the fourth quarter, they kind of have to overcome him. And I'm just hoping that eventually will go away.
Yeah, and I know you brought up the NBA Cup. I don't know about you, Nick, but one, I have no idea how the NBA Cup works because I paid no attention to it last year because I knew the Pistons weren't going to do anything in it. This year, they're 2-0, and they are first in something called East Group B. I have no idea what East Group B is, but apparently that's a good thing. Because they did beat the Heat and the Raptors in their 2 wins in the NBA Cup. But at the very least, Nick, those games at least feel like they have a little bit more of an elevated urgency or a little bit more importance. And for a franchise that has not played an important game since Blake Griffin still had good knees, I think every little bit helps. I mean, I'm not getting too worked up with this NBA Cup stuff, but if the intensity is ramped up a little bit for this is exactly what this young team needs. Playing these important games that the NBA considers important.
I hadn't even considered that perspective, Al, and because I don't know what the hell to do with the NBA Cup either.
Yeah.
Other than I hate the court colors that they have for that
dark blue of the Pistons. I do not like that.
Any of them, it's just so hard on the eyes when I'm watching it on TV. So just please just go back to the wood court, just the normal,
right?
Right. But honestly, the Pistons have been so uncompetitive in the last 3 or 4 years. Any little thing that kind of shows okay, they're making some progress.
Yeah.
Even if it's this sort of insignificant NBA Cup.
Right.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not? It gives them a little bit of excitement. One of the things I noticed with the Pistons this year that I didn't notice in the last, say, 3 or 4 years, on the court, they seem a little more organized and disciplined in general. I didn't see that in Casey's last couple of years, and I didn't see that certainly with Monty. And it looked like they get down 20, 30 points, and you got just one guy trying to strong arm, a little bit of effort to try and make it a respectable loss, really. But and they just did not seem to play like a team. They were just floundering the whole game, and I just don't generally see that out of the Pistons this year, which is a nice thing, actually. They're passing to one another. They're staying in games. Even if they're losing some close games, they're actually staying in games, which is not a small thing. So, and if the this NBA Cup is a little bit of validation of their progress. Why not? No big deal. They're not going to be in the playoffs this year. I don't know if they're quite that good. They may burn out before they get through 80 games playing the way they're playing, but who knows? So they have at least a little something.
Yeah, and that is something I did mention in the show notes, that we're starting to hear from the fan base, Greg, just a little bit. Maybe they could make the play-in. I mean, the East, as we've all mentioned, is bad this year. They got like 2 good teams, and that's it. I mean, I don't anticipate it. I could see it. If they get a few breaks and they stay healthy, and Cade Cunningham takes that step up, which everybody's been wanting him to do, hoping he could do. Maybe maybe a 9 seed is possible. I mean, I wouldn't bet on it, but at least right now, I wouldn't bet against it either.
Well, I mean, yeah, you look at the East standings, and other than Cleveland and Boston, you fall off a cliff real fast, and everybody is. There are way more teams that are under 500 in the East that are above. That's for sure. So then the question becomes, okay, well, that's 15 games, whatever, roughly for each team. Mm-hmm. Then you think, okay, well, how many games would you have to? How many games would the team that is the play-in team? How many games would they have to win to be the play-in team? You say, well, what's the line there? Is it 35 wins? Could 35 wins get you into the play-in with this horrible conference? Maybe not 35. 37, 38.
But you might be playing some interesting basketball.
Yeah, you could come down right. You could be in March, maybe a few games under 500, and mathematically still in the mix for a play-in thing. And I'm like Nick, whatever kind of incremental improvement they can show, because it's not about winning the championship. It's about getting these kids more experience, playing those games, just like the Tigers, playing those meaningful. How long have we said, God, I can't wait to play meaningful September games. Well, they did it very unexpectedly, of course, but they did it. So the same thing. When can we play, meaningful March games in basketball? Well, maybe it's this year, because how bad the East. Look at the Sixers. Yeah. I think they're 2-10 or something. The Bucks are struggling. There are a lot of teams that are just not clicking right now. And I don't know why necessarily, but once you get past Cleveland and Boston, it's just everybody's kind of in the same. Once those two get past those 2 teams, I feel like everybody's kind of in the same boat.
Yeah. It's and you just need to be a 10 seed, and you get to be in the play-in. And so who the hell? Yeah, do I anticipate it? No, but is it possible right now? I would say it's possible, but but like I said, there's a lot of basketball to play,
right?
And there's still a lot of question marks on this team. Is Doran the center of the future? Because right now the team looks better when Isaiah Stewart's on the floor. He's a much better defensive player, and that Nick, I think, is another thing to bring up with the Pistons is. One of the reasons they are hovering around 500 is they're far better defensively this year.
Yeah, if you've seen them last year, I don't think they knew what defense was, to be honest. And being a Detroit Pistons fan, their championship teams were built around defense.
Exactly.
Versus high scoring, offense of any kind. And so, I'm glad they're actually emphasizing defense, because, their last few seasons, they were getting beat regularly by 20 to 30 points. It wasn't a small margin of it wasn't like, a tight game where they lose by a point or 2. It was 20 to 30 points. And it was way too common. So if the Pistons can make it, I'm glad they're emphasizing defense finally, in addition to kind of just overall playing better and a little more organized. So, I just thought, to me, if they make the playoffs this year, it's kind of like the same old Lions making the playoffs in the past.
Yeah,
they got there by dumb luck, but they're they're 1 and out basically.
Right.
It's like that wasn't that exciting,
right.
Like in the end.
Right. Yeah.
It's like they're in the playoffs, but they have no hope. And,
right.
So, But
Yeah, because I think we're kind of right now in a maybe a honeymoon phase that they're with competency after
Yeah.
essentially 3-4 years of absolute horrific, uninspiring basketball with when you throw in some between Troy Weaver trying to trade for every center available on the market, and then the horrific Monty Williams era that was mercifully cut short. Now we're actually seeing a team not historically bad, but just might be run of the mill bad, maybe at best run of the mill below average. That feels like a huge step up, which I guess for Pistons fans that's a big deal. For a lot of franchises they would be like, yeah, what come on, but for this starved fan base that was desperately wanting to see competent basketball being played. This, it's weird, Greg. I think Pistons fans kind of feel like they're in high clover at the moment.
Yeah, there's kind of a little bit of a renaissance here now. You got the Tigers who made the playoffs, and I know we've talked about how flawed that is and how flawed it is to consider that they'll just make another leap next year. That's another story.
Yeah,
but they made
one wasn't sustainable.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Exactly.
But they made the play. That was exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Lions, obviously.
Yep.
And now the Pistons, who have been down so long, just the fact that they could, if they won tonight, they'd be 500, in mid-November.
Yeah.
So there's a little life now been breathed into this town in terms of their sports teams, and the Lions can only take it so far because they're going to be done by February. But everybody's, there's kind of like and so I think that kind of bleeds into, you start to believe when you see a team like the Lions, that was the poster child of being the worst of the worst. Mm-hmm. And now you feel like anything's possible. Okay, well, the Lions did it. Maybe the Pistons can follow suit. Maybe the Tigers can jump on the train. And I understand they're in no way, shape, or form related. I get it, but just because they play in the same city. But I think the fans, I think that can be contagious. I think that if you have optimism about one team, because hardly anybody in this town just follows one team. They follow them all. So you get optimism about the Lions, and so look at the Lions. Then you start to look at the Pistons and say, well, geez, 7-8. They could be 8-8. You look at the Tigers. Wow, they made the playoffs. All of a sudden now you start to feel like anything's possible. And you're right, Al, about the Red Wings. They're the one team that it just is not moving the meter. If anything, it's moving the meter the wrong way.
Right.
I think that. And one of you guys mentioned, I think maybe it was Al, said they're kind of fun to watch. Yeah, they are kind of fun to watch. They may make things a little bit more difficult late in the fourth quarter than they need to be, but you're interested. You're on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, it's I think that's what I think it's probably a combination of both. The Pistons actually look competent and like they're run correctly. And the fact that the Wings look so bad in comparison at the moment, I think that might be playing. As you said, most of the fan bases are fans of Detroit teams, not just one specific sport. And right now, the Red Wings are so uninspiring.
Yeah.
That especially when you look at the Lions, who we'll talk about in just a sec, and then you look at the Pistons, who at least look like they're trying. They're not. They're actually. There seems to be a plan there, or the concept of a plan, whatever you want to say. And then you compare it to the Red Wings, Nick, who just seem kind of lost and I think more than anything, and uninspired at the moment, and that makes the Pistons look that much better in comparison.
I mean, we've also been really starved for good basketball for 15 years now. I mean. And especially the last few. And it's not only with the Pistons, it's not only been the play on the court, but the front office has been a circus.
Yeah.
I've never seen, I can't think of any other sport where the general manager was flailing around with trades just left and right. I've never seen such an active general manager during trade time, during the draft and during the trade deadlines as Troy Weaver was. I mean, if you think about it, last year he traded away almost half the team, half the roster at the trade deadline. Who the hell does that? I mean, like it's insane. And so, I mean, our reference point is that's a low bar now, but they're playing games. They're actually in games, so that's not a small thing either.
Yeah.
Where it goes, long term, I don't know yet.
Yeah.
I will say though, a lot of the times, a lot of the conversations are referencing the Lions turnaround with Dan Campbell. But you got to remember there were 60 years of just dreadful Lions decision making before they got to Dan Campbell. He's kind of a freak of nature though.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I mean,
he's a unicorn, I think.
I think so too. And then, I mean, we didn't necessarily take him seriously in his intro press conference.
Well, you remember up in the right corner here, we have the guy who coined him Meathead.
I do.
And it's gone from Al Ackerman and how he with the Fleshy Boys were snide to now it's a compliment.
Yep. And
True.
oh, for sure. And I mean, and Greg had a good point back then. Like, and so yeah, I mean, what he's able to do and the fact that the players play so hard for him, that's rare in general. But yeah, and if this Pistons team play for Bickerstaff, I love it. It's great. They're back. Their coaches got their back, and the players have the coaches back. So that's not a small thing.
Yeah, and as Greg said, the coaches we've seen, Cade Cunningham played for Dwayne Casey, who essentially he got the bait and switch. When he hired him, you're going to coach a playoff team, and a year after he shows up, they're in rebuild mode, and then obviously we had the train wreck that we had last year. So yeah, and it's it's been. And just to kind of follow up, Nick, on what you said about flailing away to trade deadline, out of all those moves that Weaver made last year, all that's left of all the players that got shifted around, who we traded for, the only guy they have left is Fontecchio. That's it. Out of all those moves he made, I think he ended up some second-round draft picks and Fontecchio, and that was it. So essentially it was shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, as they say. And now it's up to Trajan Langton to clean up the mess, and so far he's getting a passing grade on that. So I think with that, since we were just discussing Dan Campbell, I think that's a good time to segue into the topic du jour in Detroit circles, and that would be the Lions, because everybody is just words fail me as to what's going on with this team, as to especially as being a lifelong fan. And just seeing what's going on with this franchise now. They're 9-1. They've won 8 straight. The last time the Lions won 8 straight games was in 1934, their first year in Detroit after coming from Portsmouth. You have the mainstream media, the talking heads on all the on everywhere, online, on television, on radio. Essentially, right now, they are all calling the Lions the best team in the NFL. And in a lot of ways, it's probably not even close because obviously the Chiefs lost yesterday to the Bills, but the Chiefs have been living on borrowed time for a while. They've had a few lucky wins.
Yeah.
Specifically with a couple weeks ago, they won on a blocked kick, for example. But, and Patrick Mahomes is not having a Patrick Mahomes kind of year. I think he threw his 11th pick last night. So, and meanwhile, you got the Lions who are setting records. I mean, it's gotten ridiculous at this point. I'm waiting for someone to give this offense a nickname, like the greatest show on turf or something, because they are doing stuff we have never seen in this town offensively. Now, not even going back to Barry Sanders, or going even back further to Bobby Lane, is that this team. Yesterday, 645 yards of offense, 38 first downs. They scored on 8 consecutive possessions, essentially 7 straight touchdowns, a field goal with the backups, and then on possession 8, they just ran out the clock and knelt down, and game was over. It was absolutely ridiculous how dominant they were over Jacksonville. And Jacksonville is a team that the Vikings could only score 12 points on the previous week. And Jacksonville, their last 3 losses have all been, I think, by less than 5 points or something like that. They're not a good team, but they're not as bad as the Lions made them look. No, even with Trevor Lawrence off the field. And it says volumes, guys. I'll go to you first, Nick. That the hot topic in Detroit this morning was, boy, does Dan Campbell keep his players in too long in blowouts? That seemed to be all that was people were discussing online and on Sports Talk Radio. Oh, why did Jared Goff play into the 4th quarter? Oh, my God, he could get hurt. And when that's all you have to complain about, that means you're in uncharted territory of this franchise.
The 3 of us have discussed this before, both on the podcast and during games. It's like we're still trying to get used to the Lions not being the same old Lions. And I kind of welcome the adjustment. I don't want to go back to the same old Lions ever again. We now have the same old Red Wings, which I think I'll go SORW, which means sorrow.
There you go.
And sorry, Greg, don't pass it through your nose. But so where was I going with this? Honestly, yesterday's game just kind of was amazing in terms of the stats and the blowout. I was more impressed with that Texans game. Yeah. Holy shit, what a game that was.
Yeah.
That was like fighting till the very end. And this is something I know we've brought up during this show last season and the season before. They have a kicker. I mean, it was a kicker that bailed their asses out on 50-plus yard,
It was a 58 and a 53, I believe.
Right.
To essentially win the game.
Right, and like no more of this. Who is the Riley Patterson,
the Money Badger,
and then Monkey Badger, and
right, yeah.
Like no more of that. Good God, imagine if they had one of those guys left over. Neither one of those guys is going to make a 58-yarder.
Yeah,
and of course, the kicker had to make it very interesting and just like barely graze the uprights on both of those kicks, but whatever, it's good. They're field goals, and as a matter of fact, the Texans kicker missed the field goal, which
exactly,
ended up hurting them. So
because what was the comment? I think it said someone said if the ball had passed by the first one specifically, the ball had passed by the uprights with the laces hit by the uprights, it would have doinked, essentially. I mean, you could literally see the shadow of the ball. I have never seen anything like that in my life. I mean, I'm literally watching the game, and I'm like this, trying to
body language.
Don't curve, don't curve.
Body English issues.
So.
But it's interesting when you bring up Bates, though. Did you notice about those 2 kicks, Nick? Neither one, those were just arrow straight. There was no deuce to them at all. And I think I was reading about it after the fact. They said the Lions just said, just kick the ball as hard as you can. Don't worry about people say, shouldn't we have like a couple different ways of kicking if he needs to get it higher or make it move or whatever. And the Lions are just saying, just kick the shit out of the ball. and when he does that, the ball goes straight. And he hasn't of all the kicks he's made, all the kicks he's had this year, he's missed 1 extra point, and that was early in the season. He's won 2 games, and he sent another game in overtime. So I mean, I remember that. If anything, that might have been what people considered one of their biggest weaknesses going into this season was the place kicking game.
Right.
And Jake Bates is the former brick salesman. It looks like he is going to be at least for the foreseeable future, essentially the Lions place kicker. For the foreseeable future, I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah, that game was something else. And they could not have played any worse in that first half. And then to come storming back with 19 points to win the game and hold the Texans scoreless. And the other thing to remember, the Texans are a first-place team. They're first place in their division. So this was not like they had to do this. They were doing this against a bad team. They were doing this against a team most people think is a playoff team.
Well, the Texans defense was pretty good, and fine. Stroud had some brain farts on offense, and but hell, Goff threw 5 picks. I mean, that's usually your goose is cooked then with 5 picks.
Yes, yeah.
So honestly, the defense played fantastic. That was one day the offense was off, but the defense kind of came through. And the total irony about when just before the second half began and Campbell said we could use a pick, and then suddenly first play pick. Like, it's like, why didn't he say a pick 6 instead? Like,
right.
But yeah, that's not the things that would normally happen to the Lions in the past.
No.
Usually the opposite.
Yeah, the same old Lions, Greg would have folded. They would not have won that game in the second half, or they would have found a way to lose that game after a wild comeback. How many times did we see that under Matthew Stafford?
Well, when I wrote about that game last week, one of the things that I pointed out was that when you are like the Lions and you have, to me, I know there's one, you always hear players say, well, we're never out of it. We'll always, every team's going to say that. Oh, we never feel like we're out of it. We're going to play into the end and we always feel like we can win. Yeah. That's fine. But I think to me, the power of the Lions, and that's goes back to Dan Campbell, is that not only do the Lions believe they're going to come back and win, but their opponents do. And what I mean by that is I'm not suggesting that teams are defeated before they take the field. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying, though, is when you play a team like that and you are the Texans, whether you're in first place, whether you're at home, whatever, and you stall out, you get a big halftime lead and things kind of go into the mud. And you see these Lions now, who were not doing great things either early in the second half, start to slowly chip away. Death by 1,000 cuts, right? Yeah. And then you start to think, okay, now you start to think like, well, these guys are not done yet. And whether Goff threw 5 picks or not, they kept coming. They kept getting stops. Nick mentioned the brain farts by Stroud. That's true, especially when he floated that ball in the end zone and that was intercepted. There's no question that was a horrible throw. But why do these teams make those plays? Lions are making those plays. They're taking advantage of teams making those plays. And I think when push comes to shove, I'm not suggesting that kicker for Houston thought he was going to miss the kick, but I'm just saying that I just feel like that everybody in the building thinks the Lions are going to come back and win. And when you've got that kind of, that's powerful stuff. And no, they're not always going to do it. Yes, you're going to be able to beat them sooner or later. That's true. But there are so many, they just look so discombobulated. And the thing that really got me about that game, guys, was at the end of the first half, when the Lions had the ball late in the first half, inside their own 20, I think, and they completely did a turtle. Went completely ballless play calling, just basically 3 and out, gave up on 3 plays, punted the ball back to the Texans, and the Texans came back and got another touchdown. And that's not a that really surprised me, because that's not Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson football at all. Right. And the fact that they did that, trying to escape, even with the Texans getting the ball to start the second half, they just tried to get out of the first half without any more damage. That's about the only time this season I can remember Campbell kind of folding the tent a little bit, and I didn't understand that, and it came back to bite them. Because the Texans came back, made it 23-7, I think, at that point. Yeah. And that really surprised me. And a lot of the fans on Reddit were eviscerating Campbell, and Johnson for that namby-pamby play calling, giving the Texans the ball back with way too much time. But there's something about these guys. I don't know what it is, but beating up us twice now. They've scored 52 points on lousy teams at home.
Yep.
They're doing what they need to be doing at home. They're winning with grit. So I suspect they'll go into Indianapolis and completely destroy the Colts, who are not very good. I really don't. I look at the schedule, guys. I don't see more than maybe one other loss, two maybe. I think they'll beat the Buffalo. I think they'll beat Buffalo at home. I know it's got tough order.
Yeah.
I think they can beat the Bills at home. They've got the Vikings at home. They got the Packers at home. They got the Bears at home.
Yeah.
You got all these home games left now.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I know they haven't played the Bears yet at all, right? They haven't played the
No.
they haven't
Right,
played
right.
Chicago as well. Okay, but they've got the Green Bay and Minnesota at home for sure. And if the team that they beat them, you think they would play the suited up next week against the Bucks and the Bucks would beat them again? No. Sometimes you're going to lose. That's it's hard to go 17-0. I get it, but I don't see much more than one or two more losses, and I'm kind of being generous to the other team. I'm being generous when I say that they could lose two more games. I don't even know who they'd lose them to. Maybe Buffalo at home. Maybe Green Bay at home.
Well, they got San Francisco on the road, but even San Francisco's looking human now.
I'm not seeing where. I mean, I don't want to get too full of myself here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not seeing any losses really. I'm not sure where they're going to lose another game. Maybe Buffalo at home. Maybe if they get into a shootout with Josh Allen and company, maybe. But I wouldn't count on it. I wouldn't. I think the Lions will probably go into that game as favorites.
They could go into Week 18 not having to, if everything clinched and just resting guys, and that could end up being, that would be, I think it's Minnesota the end of the season.
Yeah, it is.
So that could end up being, depending on how the season plays out, I could very easily say, yeah, we're not going to play our starters and give them 2 weeks off. Considering how banged up this team is, the number one seed would be getting the number one seed would be very, very important for them.
Oh, yeah.
For example, Alex Anzalone, who broke his forearm yesterday.
Right.
He's out 6 to 8 weeks. That literally puts them right at that window.
Right.
The end of the regular season, the start of the playoffs.
Right.
You can't tell me that extra week having if they could essentially rest the starters week 18 and then have a bye week the first week of the playoffs. You could not convince me that would be anything. That would be awesome for the Lions, just because of how banged up they are right now. And they could have some guys come back by that point, because it's amazing how many guys are missing off the defense. Hutch,
right.
For example, Derek Barnes.
Yes.
Emmanuel Mosley, Ife
Yes.
Melifonwu, who got hurt again today apparently, and he's going back. They're going to take him off the IR and put him back on the IR.
Oh, jeez.
John Comiskey, Marcus Davenport, Jalen Reeves-Maben, and now Anzalone. That's almost an entire starting lineup right there for both your starting defensive ends, your quarterback on defense, probably your best special teams guy who was a quality backup linebacker. Barnes, who won the Tampa Bay playoff game last year for the interception. Melifonwu, who made huge plays down the stretch last year, and yet Aaron Glenn has that defense still. I think they're 6th overall right now. They're still playing at a high level, which I think says volumes about how well Glenn is running the defense, and this is the guy the fans wanted fired 2 years ago, and two, that apparently the Lions are deeper than I thought they were on defense. Plus, it does help that the backfield for the most part has stayed pretty darn healthy.
Right.
And they have the best pair of safeties in the league, and it's not even close at this point.
Right.
Watching those two ball hawks. Well, you got one guy killing people and the other guy catching all the passes, and it's absolutely between Branch killing people on run support, and then you got Kirby Joseph has 7 picks already. 7 picks.
Right.
So
right.
And that is the difference, though, because Ben Johnson guys did mention after the scare against the Texans that even Ben Johnson mentioned, we haven't held up our part of the bargain. The last few weeks, it's been special teams and defense winning us games. We have to step up, and they really stepped up on Sunday.
Yeah, the defense has been pretty amazing. So kind of quietly, even though you mentioned you talk about all those guys that are out. That is even more impressive. And I don't know really. if you look at that, I guess you could kind of still kind of complain a little bit about the pass rush, but I really do see a stickier secondary right now. You mentioned Branch and Joseph, that right there, that gives you a lot. It makes you feel good. But I think Robertson's played well. I think Davis has played well. I think Terry and Arnold's kind of calmed down now. He's not getting as many penalties. That's good coaching. I think that's good coaching.
Davis
right
probably
there.
saved that Texans game with that pick, at end zone pick.
Yeah, right.
He made on
Because
if he doesn't make that play, it's a touchdown, and all of a sudden I think it would have been 31-17 or something like that at that point.
Yeah. Now you look at, they haven't played great quarterbacks. If you look at the quarterbacks they've played, they're not, necessarily Pro Bowl quarterbacks. Jordan Love was hurt. He was clearly not himself. Houston.
You mean Sam Darnold is not the next coming like we were being told a few weeks early in the season? Come on.
Stroud is, that's really the first time I really got a chance to see him play because I don't see the Texans very often.
Yeah, he is not playing as well as he did as a rookie.
Yeah, obviously Jacksonville's. They didn't have Lawrence. Titans. Their quarterback isn't any good.
So you think Matthew Stafford's the best quarterback they've played this year?
Well, it's hard to say. Murray
or
the Tampa Bay quarterback. Yep.
Yeah.
I
beat him. So.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe. I look back. I'm looking at the schedule right now. Kyler Murray, Geno Smith, Dak, who's been awful. You mentioned Darnold. We talked about Love. You throw Tennessee out, throw Jacksonville out. Yeah. Stroud, second-year guy. Yeah, it hasn't been a bevy of great quarter. And what's coming up next? Anthony Richardson next week.
Yep.
Campbell twice.
Yeah.
Campbell twice. Love again. Of course, Josh Allen. That's a good one.
Yeah.
49ers.
That guy is terrifying, especially as mobile as he is.
Yeah. Hey, it's the schedule. It's the schedule. But I do know this: if they get the first seed, excuse me, if they get the first seed, they will without question make it to the Super Bowl. There's no question about it. Nobody's coming into Detroit in January and winning a playoff game. No one.
Yeah.
No one. So now it becomes, okay, who are they going to play in the Super Bowl? You mentioned Kansas City. Your analogy was perfect. We're working on borrowed time. Buffalo's in the mix, of course, over there. Don't go to sleep on Pittsburgh. Of course, Baltimore's always
how is Pittsburgh doing it? I have no idea.
Yeah, well, Mike
just tells you how good Mike Tomlin is.
Mike Tomlin has been the coach. I looked this up yesterday. Mike Tomlin has been the coach of the Steelers since 2007, and this is his 18th year, and he has not had a losing record, not once. A couple times he was 8-8. He's not had. He won. I think one year he was 9-7-1 or something. He has not had a losing record in Pittsburgh. He's another one that's going to the Hall of Fame, by the way. He has not had a losing record as a Steelers head coach. It's amazing. And like you said, and he's done it. This is not the first time he's taken a team that didn't think was going to be very good and has done some good things. Now, he doesn't always win in the playoffs. I get it. Yeah. But he wins. He wins games. Yeah. And
he's a hell of a coach.
Yeah. And they love him over there. And Pittsburgh's had incredible luck with head coaches. They've only had 3 since 1969. Think about that for a second.
Yeah.
3 head coaches since 1969. So you can't cut out Pittsburgh. I don't know who they're going to play. I know that they're going to. I know this. I'm going to say it right now. They're going to the Super Bowl. There's no question about it. Now, who they play there, I don't know. But they are. I don't see anyone beating them. And I definitely don't see anybody coming into Ford Field in January and winning the NFC Championship game. No way. Yeah. No way. Especially after what happened to them last year. No. No.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And go ahead, Nick.
I was going to say what Greg said. We always talk about kind of what it takes to get into the championship or the Super Bowl, for instance. And I've often said that the team that makes it is the runner-up in the Super Bowl does not return the next year. Yeah. And I'll say that for like any sport. And usually that's true because what usually happens is then if they don't make it, then everyone says, oh, they were just like one player away. And so they're going to get that one player and they just make it all the way back there. a lot of these teams will make it only because, they had spirited play that season, and usually the offseason erases a lot of that attitude.
Right.
But there are some occasions where the team that sort of misses on even getting to the Super Bowl has a chip on their shoulder and plays angry the next year.
Right.
I'm thinking the Bad Boys, every time, they climbed, they just got a little bit closer and a little bit closer every year. And they had a chip on their shoulder. They had some attitude to them. And the Wings teams were kind of that way too, maybe in a quieter way. But I think the Lions have that. I think that losing to the 49ers last year, I know it sucks to lose out when they should have won. They let the game get away. Mm-hmm. But I think that was one of the growing pains that they needed for this year. Yeah. And I don't think the outcome with the game with the 49ers is going to be in a couple of weeks is going to be like the last time they met. And I think they're going to play with a chip on their shoulder. Their coach is not going to let them forget what happened last year, and they're going to play angry all the way. And it could be to a Super Bowl. So,
comparing the 2023 Lions to the 1987 Pistons that's a great analogy. I mean, the Pistons literally gave that series away. That series away that should have sent them to the championship series against Boston. They were better than Boston at that point, but they lost, and they gave that series away. So that's a great analogy. And we also should bring up that the Lions did, after over a month of consternation from the fan base, the Lions did trade for an edge defender. And as rumored, the target ended up being 32-year-old Browns defensive end Za'Darius Smith. They sent 2 draft picks, a 2025 fifth and a 2026 sixth to Cleveland in exchange for Smith, who was under contract for 1 more year, and a very reasonable contract at that, and a 2026 seventh round selection. And this is volumes about the Lions right now. Last week was supposed to be his bye week, so the Lions just gave him the week off. Said, we're not going to play you against the Texans, even if we do need you. They're thinking long term. We're going to let you get that week of rest, and then we'll play you against, get you in the lineup against the Jags, which they did, and he had a half a sack in his first game. And the other thing I really loved about Za'Darius Smith, other than it really looks like he really wants to be here, is that I don't know if you saw the pictures online of him showing up to the game yesterday, and he's wearing a Rasheed Wallace jersey. Yeah. I mean, if that doesn't show he did a little research into Detroit sports lore.
Right.
No, because the player that got, we all know the player that got the going to work business over the hump was that midseason trade for Sheed. Yep. And people also noted he wore number 30, which is the number he wore in 2004. And then he went to 36 after that. So I think that shows a guy that, 1, really wants to be here, and 2, knows how to pander to the fans. Because I got to say, I ate it up. I thought it was just awesome thing for him to do.
Well, he's also probably glad he's not in Cleveland anymore.
Yep, exactly.
But didn't he look like Rasheed Wallace, though?
He does. That's the other
thing. He does. You're right.
Yes.
I mean, he had the beard just like Wallace did. It's like, holy crap, that's like really close resemblance.
Yeah. So, because if there's a lot of beloved athletes in this town, but Rasheed Wallace really is beloved in Detroit. And for good reason.
For sure.
Yeah. Anything that allows people to scream "ball don't lie." I mean, I'm all for it. So, but yeah, it's is he a game changer? No, but does he fit a need? Does he fit the team? Yes. So and he didn't give up much for him. So it was a, and it's not like other teams were just giving away defensive ends. This was the best player available at the time. The Lions got him. He fits into the team, and like I said, he got half a sack yesterday, and he did supply pressure. So far so good. All right. Anything else you guys want to add about the Lions before we start hitting the home stretch here? Anything else I've missed, or anything you want to discuss?
I don't think so.
No. Bueller? Okay. All right. With that means it's time for our jerk of the week. As always, Nick, I'll let you go first. Who's your jerk?
This is kind of a mild one for me. It's not like
Yeah.
my rants about the Pistons last season, but
Yeah.
I'm going to bring up the whole Mike Tyson, Jake Paul
Mhm.
circus. Like, I being the same, Gen X like Mike Tyson is, I did want him to smack the shit out of Jake Paul. But if you step back and look at it, like, what the hell was going on there? Like, in general, seriously, how much pot was Mike Tyson smoking to get back into the ring at age 58 or whatever
I
he
think
is?
$20 million worth, apparently.
Apparently so, yeah. But just the kind of whole thing was a little bit silly. And I think boxing has been suffering from a lot of like. I used to follow it when in like the 80s and maybe died off a little bit in me for the 90s. But I think like it's like all the MMA was going to like supplant boxing in terms of interest in like a ring sport. Let me put it that way. It's not that interesting. There's no like stars like Muhammad Ali was and Tyson when he was young and anything like that. So it's just kind of been to me, it's been sort of a meh sport. So that's probably why they're doing it. But I don't know. Some people joke that like Jake Paul is now going to play in a home run derby against Babe Ruth and other weird shit like that. So, but this is kind of a mild jerk of the week. It's just kind of like a much ado about nothing sort of event. So,
did you try and watch the fight at all?
I
just say fight in quotes. I'll do that. Yeah.
I kind of tried. So for me, they started the broadcast at 5 p.m. Mm-hmm. And the way the Netflix thing read is that the undercard would have started much earlier, and then the Tyson Paul fight would have been at 5 p.m. my time, which wasn't true. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, I was committed to go to a spoon carving get together. Yes, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We took a piece of wood and carved spoons.
Okay, I want to see the spoon on the next podcast. Yeah.
Well, I just got this close to having a hole right in the middle of the spoon. Like, apparently, spoon carving is a thing nowadays, and there was like 20 or 30 people just hanging out carving spoons for 3 hours. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad I watched that instead of watching the fight. I still haven't seen the replay of the fight and anything, and I don't think I'm going to. Who cares?
Yeah. Well, the other issue is that it was obvious. I watched a little bit of it because the wings were an absolute shit show that night, and the buffering. That was they got I think, don't they have an NFL doubleheader on Christmas? If they can't handle this, how are they going to handle people tuning in to watch the NFL on Christmas when everybody is home? I mean, it's going to be an absolute shit show if Netflix doesn't get their shit together. So yeah, because the little bit I was able to watch it, it was the quality of the picture was like I was watching. It was like watching the quality of an old tube television. It was not HD. That was for damn sure. It was like watching an old 32-inch tube TV from like 10 feet away. It was that kind of blurry, if you know what I'm saying, compared to how sharp TVs are. But yeah, I'm with you there, Nick. I was hoping Tyson would knock his block off, but apparently Tyson went rounds where he didn't even throw a punch.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, I just put what little I saw of the fight, and I have a completely fused back. My spine is one-piece bone. I'm more mobile than Mike Tyson. That's how much he moved during that fight.
Really?
Or fight, I should say. I remember use quotes. It was not a fight. It was an exhibition. So yeah, I'm with that. I knew one of us was going to bring that up. So Nick got the low hanging fruit out of the way, and that's a good call because if you didn't go with it, I was going to go with it. So you nailed it there. Greg, who's your jerk?
Well, I'm going to go. This is another kind of softball one as well. It's not going to really be worthy of a rant necessarily, but I'm going to go with Thursday Night Football and specifically Al Michaels. Yeah. I think Al has lost. I think we can all agree he's lost a couple miles off his fastball, and some of these calls have been less than enthusiastic. Let's put it that way. But to me, the whole Thursday night football thing, usually the matchups are not really all that intoxicating. To be honest with you, they're just not the best of the best.
Yeah.
And that's the first thing. And then Al I think he's to the point now where it's got to think about hanging him up. I mean, I've always liked Al Michaels. In his prime, I thought he was very good at Monday Night Football. I thought he was a good baseball announcer, quite frankly, when he was doing the ABC games and stuff in the playoffs. But gosh, that was 40 years ago, guys. And now I just listen to him, and he just feels like he just doesn't feel like he wants to be there necessarily. I know the matchups sometimes aren't the greatest, but he's not. There's no juice left in his calls, and so I hate to even say he's a jerk because that's kind of rough, but the whole the Thursday Night Football franchise is just kind of like, why are we doing this? Why are we playing games with 3 days rest? That's not a Thanksgiving Day game. I think the NFL should just reconsider the whole Thursday. I know they won't, but should reconsider the whole Thursday Night Football experience, quite frankly.
I think it's not the first time I think it's come up about Al Michaels being sort of flat or meh.
Yeah.
Or not like, say, classic Al Michaels on there.
Right.
And I think he's even said that, these matchups are just not that interesting.
Right.
Which probably reflects in his level of kind of enthusiasm and energy. I mean, plus he's 80 years old now?
80, yeah.
So, yeah, but Amazon paid the NFL probably tons and tons of money, and both of these, they also paid these two guys a ton of money to announce the games. So they're not going away for sure.
Right.
Yeah, plus isn't Al Michaels got to be like 80 years old at this point.
He is. He's 80.
Yeah, so it's announcers tend to hang around too long. I mean, I know we were texting one night, and I went off about George Blaha. He shouldn't be doing Pistons games at this point.
Yeah.
He misses calls. He mispronounces names. He's behind the pace of play. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Johnny Kane, but he's better than George Blaha.
Bob Costas isn't Bob
Costas, I think, finally admitted it. Yeah, and he admitted it. Yeah,
he missed a couple. He missed a couple calls in the playoff series that were kind of embarrassing. Yeah,
and he admitted it. Yeah, it's time to retire. So you nailed it. And I like Herb Street, but if there's a guy who was gotten things a little too thin, it's him. I mean, he does Thursday night football, then he does game day Saturday morning, and then he flies to whatever game he's calling for that night. I don't know how the hell he can even keep up with that kind of schedule.
Right.
And know what you're talking about, if you know what I'm saying. Because the Thursday night games have a lot of issues, and announcing is a big part of that. So I'm with you there. All right, my jerk of the week. No, I'm going to keep it sports oriented too this week. We're on the field oriented. I'll put it that way. And my jerk of the week are the New York Jets. To talk about a train wreck, and it's been a glorious one to watch, especially after we had to suffer watching Aaron Rodgers play in the North for all those years and beating the Lions. And watching the wheels fall off of Aaron Rodgers in New York has been wonderful to see. And also the fact that they fired Robert Saleh when they were 2-3, and I believe they're 1-5 since they fired their coach. And essentially, they put the franchise in the hand of Rodgers, and Rodgers has all his hand-picked people there, and that franchise is a train wreck. Rodgers is looking like he's washed up at this point. He's not the quarterback he was even 2 or 3 years ago. But I think he's like, he's 40, 41, and it's been one misstep after another for the Jets. And just watching how things have absolutely fallen apart after they fired Saleh, who wasn't a great coach, but I don't think he deserved to get fired either. More than anything, I love seeing Aaron Rodgers get a bit of a comeuppance, because there is one man that I think most sports fans despise at this point for various reasons, either because of his years in Green Bay, either because of his views on everything else in the world that he tends to spew about on Pat McAfee. Don't get me going about that guy. as an anti-Rodgers guy, it's been fun to see. And the Jets have been shooting themselves in the foot for decades. They're much like the Lions of the AFC, except for the Browns. The Browns are even worse shape. But the Jets have been stumbling along for years, much like the Lions did. And they're in no sign of getting out of what the mire they're stuck in. So my jerk of the week are the New York Jets for essentially putting their entire franchise in the hands of a prima donna quarterback who apparently is washed up and a little bit crazy. So that's my jerk of the week. I
Nice.
see a lot crazy. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, nice.
Exactly. All right, guys. I think it's time to wrap it up. So, Greg, as always, if you get out the thank yous and the what fors and maybe what else, where we are on social media and all that fun stuff.
Sure. Thank you, of course, to Keith Gabe for a wonderful hour almost. That was great. As usual, we enjoyed it. Love to have Keith back on the show. I'm not sure what we're going to do on December 2nd. Nobody lined up yet. We'll see. Maybe we'll go guestless. We haven't done that in a while. But follow, of course, the Knee Jerks on X at the Knee Jerks. Follow me on X at Greg Eno. Of course, please subscribe to my Substack, gregeno.substack.com, and I'll be in your inbox every Monday. And I want to thank my lovely wife, Sharon, and putting up with this nonsense. And thank you, gentlemen, for making Monday night so gosh darn fun.
All right, and let's go to Mr. Wizard, who has the periodic table behind him tonight, and that would be Nick Milanovich. Nick, where can they find you on social media?
Mr. Wizard.
Would you believe this is not the virtual wallpaper? This is literally what I have in the back in my.
Actually, it's pretty damn cool. I like it.
Yeah, I like it.
I got it from IKEA. If you can believe it. I just walked there.
You had to assemble it, though.
I actually did. This thing's huge, by the way. So, and but you can find me on Twitter at Nick Milanovich, and I'm there usually talking about Detroit sports for sure, with a bunch of other Detroit natives, whether we still live in the Detroit area or not. So come and join the fun and have a conversation, complain about your favorite teams or praise them, which usually isn't as much fun, to be honest. Yeah. But yeah, come and enjoy the crowd. The more, the merrier.
All right. And as always, we would appreciate it if you like, share, and subscribe to the Knee Jerks podcast of Eno, Nick, and Big Al. So that means you can do it at all the usual places. Pretty much any place podcasts are found, you can listen to the Knee Jerks. We're on places like apps like Apple Podcasts. We're on YouTube Music. We're on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon Music, Deezer, Radio Public, Ghana. TheKneeJerks.net is our homepage where you can find essentially all the links to the things we're talking about. For example, I will link to Keith Gabe's Amazon author page so you can look up his books. And please, good stuff. We recommend her. And honestly, Greg, I'd love to have him back on again when his new book comes out. We have to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. Grindline, yeah.
And exactly. And so but all the links to our social media, to Greg's Substack, to all the anything involving our guests can be found at TheKneeJerks.net. You can also download the MP3 from there. And I guess other than that, I think that about covers it. I think I will be home for the next podcast. I was actually supposed to be up at the cottage today, at the lake right now, but things have happened, so we haven't left yet. And we'll get up there sometime this week, hopefully. So, but maybe the next show I might be at the cottage, so we might be a little, it might be not as well edited, but we'll see. But anyway, we'll figure things out as we go. And as always, just look for Greg post stuff on social media to find out what's going on with the show. So with that, let's get the hell out of here. So we're running over as usual. So until this time, 2 weeks from tonight, this is Al Beaton saying good evening, good luck, and aloha, along with Nick Milanovich.
Good night, guys.
And of course, Greg Eno.
Ciao, Italy. We'll see you in 2 weeks.